Alright, so out of the box, I've encountered a problem on this truck. I was driving this within the house, and after a few minutes, the driveline started to sound a bit weird. And as you can hear, now obviously I couldn't drive this outside, and somehow I've ran into this issue even before I got a chance to run the truck outside. So in this video we'll see what the problem is and how to fix this weird noise or the grinding issue in the rear half of the drive line. So let's see what it is and how to fix it. Now, to those who have this truck or anyone who's watching this, you might think that the truck is sounding alright and there is no problem, but this is not how the driveline sounds out of the box. I can literally feel and hear that there is something going on in the rear half of the truck. So we'll see what it is. So I will have to take a look at the center differential and the rear differential as well. So we need to remove almost the entire rear bulkhead. Working on this car is not going to be very easy, and trying to remove the center differential or the rear differential is actually a bit of a task, because you need to remove a lot of screws in order to access the diffs, and in a while you will get to see that as well. So with the 2mm hex, let's just remove all the screws which we have. But before that, because we have the center chassis brace over here, we need to remove the brace itself. So with the 3mm hex wrench, we can remove the screw. Here on the front we have one more. Now it is a bit frustrating and disappointing to be working on a truck when it's brand new out of the box. So I've basically separated the center chassis brace. So now we can remove this portion of the diff cover, or the bulkhead you can call it. Now we need to use this 2mm hex wrench or screwdriver and remove all these screws that which we see on the top. So here I've separated the top cover, which is placed over the pinion gear. And because this entire unit is one, we need to lift this rear shock tower in order to remove this plastic bulkhead. We have two screws over here which we have to remove. So once you remove the screws which are over here, we have few more screws on this side. So we need to separate the shock tower on the bulkhead. So remove these 4 screws over here. So this truck definitely does not have an easy access diff like we have on the Terminator. We need to remove a lot of screws in order to access the differential. So here we can see that the shock tower is separated. Now next, because this has sway bars on the rear, we need to remove that in order to remove the screws over here. We need to remove these screws to So these two small screws are actually which hold the sway bar in place. We also need to remove the rear bumper. Just by watching you can tell that there's a lot of screws that we have to remove, and it is a bit irritating. We had to remove 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So in order to remove this cover, we had to remove 18 screws, and after that we can have a look at the center diff and the rear differential. Here I'm removing the motor mount. So if you don't remove the motor mount, you won't be able to access the center diff and remove the rear differential. So we can basically separate the motor once the motor mount screws are removed. And it seems like the pinion also has some play. Alright, so it seems like that we don't have a problem with the center diff. Maybe the grub screw, maybe the pinion is actually slipping on the motor shaft, and well, that is the case. Here we can see the culprit. So the grub screw is actually fallen inside over here. The good thing is that we don't have a problem with the center diff, the bearing, or the rear differential, and it is a minor problem. So the grub screw, now this has some grease on it, so I'll clean this and fix it on the pinion. Here I'm removing the heat sink of the motor. So I've separated this heat sink and the motor and the cooling fans. Take a look at the brushless motor. The rear end of this motor is open, so dust will definitely enter here and eventually the bearing can get jammed. And on the motor mount we have some figures, so 12 turn, 14 turn, 15 turn and 13 turn. So you can adjust the mounting of the motor if you are using a different pinion. Now there is some grease on this gear and the shaft, and before I install the grub screw I want to make sure to clean this. So here there is a small clip which holds the pinion in place. We need to remove that. So once this E-clip is removed, you can slide the pinion gear. Now actually, apart from the center diff, the rear diff and the front diff on this truck, they have grease in them. So if you want, you can install silicone oil in them. And since in order to remove the diff, it's not that easy with all those screws that we have to work on, I'm going to take apart the differential, even though it's all right and it has no problem, because the problem was over here with the pinion gear grub screw. So to remove this center diff and the rear differential, we need to remove this entire motor mount assembly to lift this up. And for that we have 3 screws over here, one over here and one over here, and I believe 2 more which we have to access from the bottom. So let's flip the truck and remove these screws over here. Center drive shaft, and you can lift the motor mount at least the diff cup on the center diff is in metal. Let's remove this and see. It is actually quite snug, so now the bearings on this truck are metal shield. We don't have a rubber seal on them. So these bearings could wear out quite easily. So there is some cost cutting on the bearings, and if you want you can replace the bearings as and when they get worn out or jammed. I'm not going to disassemble this differential, the center diff, because this has diff oil in it and I don't see any reason to work on it. Might as well just tighten the screws a bit, because I can definitely torque them. So they are a bit loose from factory. Now let's remove the rear differential. So actually, I'm not sure if you can hear this, but the diff gear and the pinion gear, it sounds a bit dry when I rotate it. Although there is some grease, but it's not on the teeth of the gears. So we need to remove this screw in order to separate this to be able to work on the diff. The design of this truck is definitely not user friendly, especially when you want to work on it. In fact, there are 2 screws on the opposite side, so we still have to remove this one. So basically these 2 plastic parts hold the differential pinion, bearing and the diff in place. And I can literally spin this quite easily. So at least on this MJX truck we can remove the screws without stripping them, unlike the Omni Terminator. But So once the screws are removed, we can separate the diff gear and the diff cap. You can see we do have a gasket, but all that's inside the diff is grease. Now the bearings on the diff are actually snug, or they are perhaps fixed with Loctite, not sure. Again, all the bearings on this truck, as we can see, are metal shield. We don't have rubber shield on them, not even on one side. So eventually these bearings will wear out and we will have to replace them. So I'll have to clean all the parts and install fresh oil. Now here we'll see how to remove the front diff. So just as the rear differential, in order to remove the front differential, we will have to remove this front bulkhead, and that's also one complete plastic part. So we cannot remove the differential easily on the front as such. So even the front diff is not an easy access. First we'll remove the front bumper from here. So here I'm removing all the screws on the differential bulkhead. It's better to remove the shock tower to make some space so that you can work on it easily. Although I would also suggest that you just remove the wheels and the lower arm assembly all the way, as all these parts do get in the way and it will take up some time. So now here we can see that the entire diff bulkhead is one unit, and it's actually a part of the steering post as well. So we do have to remove these two screws. In order to access the front differential. Now actually I haven't removed the sway bars, but since now that we have some space, we can remove it. So the front diff bulkhead, I mean MJX can literally have a cut in the center, and maybe we can just remove the front half of the diff bulkhead and access the diff. So the front differential pinion and the drive cup are actually connected with a screw from here. So we won't be able to remove the bearings from this side. If you want to replace the bearings, make sure to remove this screw, separate the pinion, differential pinion, and replace the bearings. Here we have the front diff, just as the rear differential. Alright, so as you can see that I've cleaned the differential parts, and I'll be using this 30K diff oil. Alright, so first I'll grab the diff cup and install the bearing on it. Next I'll install the drive cup and place the silicone O-ring. If you want, you can lubricate this O-ring and install the washer, followed by this pin which will hold the drive cup in place. Next, we will install this side gear. Followed by the smaller spider gears with the shaft. Make sure they interlock and spin smoothly. Like this. Next, I'll grab the ring gear, install the O-ring, followed by the bearing, and install the drive cup. Washer and the locking pin. Similarly, I'll assemble the other differential. Alright, so I'll be pouring this 30K diff oil in both the front and back. If you want, you can use 50K in the front and 30 in the rear, but I want to experiment with 30K diff oil in the front and rear, so that's what I'll be using. And gently rotate the diff so that the oil spreads. You'd want to fill it up till the cross shafts, and that is more than sufficient. And do make sure that the cross shafts are still in place, they are interlocked. Right, so the diff is almost ready to be assembled, as you can see. Next, I will install the paper gasket. Now, These gaskets have two holes on them, which you have to align on the diff cup like so. So basically there are these two ears on the diff cup which help in aligning the gasket and the ring gear on the diff cup. I'll be using this blue thread lock to secure the screws on the differential. Although the diff cup is in plastic. Similarly on the ring gear also we have two holes which align with the ears on the diff cup over here. So it makes quite easy to line the holes on the differential. So once the diff is assembled, I can straight away feel a big difference. I can feel the weight, the differential mechanism. So our differentials are ready to be installed, and out of the box I think it is recommended to fill the differentials with silicone diff fluid. Here I'll make sure that the screw on the differential pinion is snug and it doesn't fall off. So this one is for the front differential. We have the drive cup on the differential pinion. So this is basically the diff case, you can call it, which holds the differential and the pinion in place. And as you can see that we have this plastic tab on this part, whereas on this one we don't. So the differential ring gear will face like this. So once the pinion and diff is in place, it will spin freely. And as you can see that the diff case is flush. Similarly, this one is for the rear differential, which has the smaller pinion gear. Again, make sure that the direction is correct. First you have to install the pinion followed by the diff like so, and install the other plastic cover. Make sure that the differential spins smoothly. Install the screw and check once more that there's no binding. So now we can install the diff in the truck. First, let's install the front diff. Now, the placement of the differential is also directional, so you have to install it correctly, otherwise the diff will lock and the truck won't move. And to figure this out, just look at the diff housing and you can see we have this curve arch over here for the ring gear to spin. So that's where the differential ring gear will be seated. Now, if you want, you can remove all the tie rod and the lower arm so that you can install the diff easily. Here I'll apply some marine grease on the differential. Just a bit more. Next, I will install this differential bulkhead. And there's also this silicone ring which will be placed over here inside the drive cup. If you want, you can install the center drive shaft at this stage. Make sure to install the bearing if it's fallen from here, from the steering post. Make sure that you use the right screws and refer the manual if required, and install the screws. Install the sway bar and also connect the shock tower on the differential bulkhead. So the front section is assembled and ready. Now we'll move on to the rear half. So again, I'll apply some grease on the rear diff. And for the rear, the differential will be seated like this. As you can see, and before we install the diff in place, we need to connect the CVT drive shaft in the diff cup and also install the center differential and the center drive shaft for the four-wheel drive. So the center diff and the center drive shaft have to be installed at this stage before you install the rear diff. Now one trouble that you might have is the rear differential pinion gear won't connect with the center differential gear, and you might have to remove it and slot them together. So here you can see that I'm trying to connect the center diff to the rear differential, but it's not that easy. So this is a bit of a bummer because it is a bit irritating and tedious. So I'm just going to remove the rear tie rods to make some space and have some space to work on it. So I'll just remove it all the way and try to get it in place. So as you can see that it is a tight fit and it doesn't slide in easily. So you might have to tap it with a wrench or a hammer. That's of course if you can get it in place correctly. So I've managed to get it in place somewhat. The bearing also has to be seated in the differential case, as you can see, and this is how it's supposed to be. And make sure it spins smoothly, the motor mount and the differential itself. Just gently tap the center diff so that there is no gap in between the center diff and the rear diff, and this is how it's supposed to be. So make sure that the center diff is also seated properly on the motor mount. And you might have to tap it slightly from the side so that the bearing is seated all the way. And place the center drive shaft and so as you can tell that because the differential bulkhead and the motor mount are almost one unit entirely, installing or removing them is not that user friendly. So it is a bit of a task if you don't have the patience to work on this truck. Make sure that the diff cup is aligned with the CVT drive shaft. Install the shock tower. Right, so I've finished installing the rear differential, and you can see that the truck is rolling smoothly and freely. So now it's time to install the motor. So because the grub screw had fallen off, again I'm using blue thread lock over here. Make sure the pinion gear is aligned with the motor shaft, and Before you screw the grub screw, install the E-clip and then tighten the grub screw. Alright, so the main problem has been fixed, which was the loose pinion gear, and as you can hear that the truck sounds normal. Here I'm applying some grease on the pinion gear just to make it a bit smooth, and install the motor mount screws with some thread lock. And as you can hear that the truck sounds absolutely butter smooth. I've installed the pinion cover. Here's how it used to sound before, and here's how it sounds now. So lastly, reattach the center chassis brace on the shock towers and screw it. Alright then, so the problem has been addressed and the truck sounds normal as before. I'm glad it was a minor problem with the grub screw on the pinion gear. Now I've removed the sway bars from this truck because I don't feel they're required, especially because of the suspension, which is so damn stiff. So if you want to remove the sway bar, just remove the 2 screws from here and use a tweezer or a wrench and disconnect the ball joint of the sway bars, and you can remove the sway bar completely. Now next I'll be tuning the shocks to my preference, so because I feel like the suspension is a lot on the stiffer side and you will definitely break something if you land the truck hard on a big jump. So the front is alright, but the rear is definitely stiff. So the next video will change the shock coil on this truck and perhaps try to make it like the Omni Terminator, which has one of the best shocks that an RTR model has. So stay tuned for the next video and subscribe if you haven't, and that's all I have to share in this one.